Hello everyone, Mark from Real Street Performance here, and today we're testing Precision Turbo's 7675 Next Gen with their new 1.20 AR VB4 turbine housing on our 2JZ GTE Mule. This test completes two testing phases for us. We've spent the last couple of months cataloging the 2JZ GTE engine in an unported configuration with the appropriate manifolds and turbochargers that this engine configuration is typically used with. We've tested 5 different boost targets from 29 pounds to over 40 pounds, ultimately reaching 1144 horsepower at 41.5 psi. For this test, we utilized the new Precision Turbo 1.20 AR V-band inlet housing for the small frame packaging on Artec's Big Daddy 70mm V-band inlet manifold, and TurboSmart's ProGate 50mm wastegate, along with our PlasmaMan street intake manifold and a single set of ID 2600 injectors. This is all on 1-ethanol, 112S fuel, and our Superflow SF PowerMark engine dyno. During our prior testing, we used the same engine, camshafts, and intake manifold to set a baseline of 977.6 horsepower at 28.7 psi on the 7275 turbo with the 115 AR T4 divided housing. We found the 7675 to produce only 953 horsepower at the same 29 pounds, suggesting that the 7275 is actually the better choice at this power level. Right now the 76 is still kind of asleep. I wouldn't be using a 76 at only 29 pounds, but this was 29 psi. Actually in our last test, the 7275 at 29 psi on a smaller housing made more power than this, which kind of points to what we were saying before. Be honest with yourself about where you're going to use your turbo. So if you're only running 29 psi, 900,000 horsepower, you don't want the 7675. So here we're only about 92,000 turbocharger RPM. This compressor wheel's rated up to about 131,000, so we're still really low here. Again, you're running more exhaust housing than you would, but so turbo's barely awake. At this point, we making 953 horsepower, perfectly fine, but I expect it to start showing gains over the 72 at like 33, 36, 40 pounds. That's where it should start to show more power versus a 72, 75. Next, we checked out the 7675 at 33 psi, where it gained 73.5 horsepower for 3.5 pounds of boost. This is 21 horsepower per pound, so this extra boost is still providing excellent returns with a peak power now of 1,026 horsepower at 32.6 psi. On run 3, we turned it up to 36 psi, where it generated 1,080. This is also roughly the same power that the 7275 produced at 36 psi, so this is a good beginning of a crossover point to where a 76 may be paying dividends over a 72 in this combination.
Engine pressure ratio was slightly over 1.1 to 1 at this boost, however, so we expect to start getting less returns per pound of boost added from this point forward.
So far so good. We ran it up to 36 pounds so far. It made almost exactly the same power that we made on the 7275 with the 115 T4 divided, except that we've got about 10,000 less RPM of compressor speed. So we would expect from here the 76 will start demonstrating some gains over what the 72 could produce, but we're already at 1.1 to 1 pressure ratio, so our power production per pound is starting to come down already, but we're going to move up to 40 pounds next, and then if we're not over 1.3 to 1 at peak power, then we'll move up to 44 pounds, but we may be able to get where I want to be at 40 pounds for this test. What you have here is you have the boost pressure versus the exhaust pressure trace over these runs. And you can see these are the first 3 runs of the 1.20 housing. So here we've made about 950 horsepower at 29 pounds of boost. It made 1026 at 33 pounds of boost, and then up 1079, 1080 at 36 pounds of boost. Again, this is an unported cylinder head, so there's power on the table if somebody would put more effort into this engine, but this is just kind of like bolting a turbocharger, an intake manifold, and fuel onto a stock 2J. So again, we're going to turn it up from here, but we're already losing a little bit of efficiency. You can see here we were at 21.9 pounds per horsepower per pound, down at 29 pounds of boost, and we've already started to lose a little bit of that as the exhaust pressure has started to creep over the intake pressure. So as we turn this up to 40 and 43 pounds, I would expect this to continue dropping down to say 21 and then 20.6, 20.5 type of horsepower per pound, and at that point we'll see the elevated exhaust pressure, and that's where we'll stop.
On run 4, we turned it up to 40 psi, which produced over 1130 horsepower and over a 1.2 to 1 engine pressure ratio. This is likely a good stopping point for this combination. Between run 3 and run 4, the 4 pounds of boost was only worth 54 horsepower, or 13.5 pounds per psi.
Kind of what we saw in run 3, where our power production was starting to decrease from our elevated exhaust pressure. We saw more of that in run 4. We went from 21.3 horsepower per pound to 20.8 horsepower per pound. So we made 1134 at 40 pounds. Our engine pressure ratio at peak power was about 1.2. So I would expect we're going to continue losing power efficiency here. We're only about 1.25 to 1 engine pressure ratio at red line here at 8,400, 41 versus 51. So we're going to attempt to turn it up to 43.5 pounds. And see where we land. That will likely be the last test here.
We also made a number of attempts at 3 bar, or 43.5 psi. We stopped short of adding CO2 boost control, but between the elevated exhaust pressure, the larger wastegate valve face, and some other factors, the peak boost was still falling, as we've seen with our other high exhaust pressure applications in our testing. Our best run made a peak power of 1144 horsepower at 41.5 psi, falling slightly to redline. The power at this point had been pushed back, peaking at 7,800 RPM and falling by redline. And the extra boost between tests 4 and 5 only generated 7.2 horsepower per PSI added. Now, note, this is not the compressor wheel being out of flow. This is the compressor wheel fighting the turbine and the pressure in the system. At 8,400 RPM between these two tests, we only had 0.4 more PSI of boost, but 7.0 more exhaust pressure. That's how much harder we're having to run the turbo to try and achieve these boost targets. So what does this tell us? We feel that this gives us a great profile of what the engine can do for most 2JZ owners without the space or budget for a larger turbo system, or for those who are just trying to truly understand what works well over 1,000 horsepower. The unported 2JZ GTE is a great option for people up through about 1,100 horsepower or 40 PSI. After those levels, the turbine, though, is going to become a bottleneck. But our goals with the engine dyno and this content is for us and you to learn when and where to use these parts for the best outcomes. Thanks again to Precision Turbo for always looking to Real Street to test and validate your new products. Turbochargers are what we do here. Any combination that anyone has, feel free to reach out to us and we'll be happy to help you try and design your turbo system. We hope that you've enjoyed following along as we've cataloged this engine. Stay tuned as we tear down this dyno mule to show you how it lived with a couple hundred runs of high pressure, high heat abuse on its stock crankshaft and wet sump oiling. We plan to show you how the engine lived and eventually rebuild it with the next iteration of our mule, which will be another built 2JZ block 3-liter, but this time with a ported cylinder head and stock size valves. As always, thanks for watching.